The universe, as it turned out, had a hierarchy. Not the kind anyone talked about in polite diplomatic channels, but the kind everyone knew existed the moment you walked into a room full of mixed-species military personnel. At the top sat the Krell Empire, all scales and attitude, whose idea of negotiation involved showing you their weapons catalogue. Just below them lurked the Vex Confederacy, insectoid collectives, who'd turned neurotic preparation into an art form and possessed the annoying habit of being right about everything, approximately 60% of the time, which they roundly considered a failure rate. And then, occupying the space usually reserved for comic relief, came humanity. The Terrans, the upright apes, the mammals who'd somehow stumbled into space travel, despite coming from a planet so embarrassingly temperate that their most famous literature involved complaining about rain. They drank bean water to stay awake, leaked salt water when they overheated, and required a truly ridiculous amount of H2O just to keep functioning. Their military doctrine, such as anyone understood it, seemed to involve equal parts improvisation, stubbornness, and what the Krell had termed aggressive stupidity. Nobody took them seriously. Why would they? This universal truth formed the foundation of the Interspecies Military Cooperation Initiative, a program with a name longer than its actual usefulness, designed to force various galactic powers to play nice through mandatory joint training exercises. The theory went that if you made different species suffer together, they'd learn to work together. The practice mostly involved a lot of requisition forms filed in triplicate and strongly worded complaints about dietary accommodations. Planet Torresh-9 served as the initiative's crown jewel, a neutral training ground that nobody particularly wanted and therefore nobody fought over. Tectonically stable, atmospherically boring, hosting vegetation that couldn't even muster the enthusiasm to be poisonous. Perfect for teaching young soldiers that war was 90% logistics and 10% trying not to insult someone's egg-laying rituals. Commander Zilthax of the Krell 3rd Expeditionary Force stood on the landing pad, scales gleaming in Torresh-9's dual suns, and surveyed his assigned unit with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered mold in their ration pack. One Vex, acceptable, if irritating. Hive Segment Crest had a service record that read like an anxiety disorder made manifest, but the insectoids were thorough to the point of obsession, useful in combat, exhausting in conversation. And one human. Corporal Chen Martinez looked like someone had taken the concept of average and made it a person. Medium height by human standards, which meant shorter than Zilthax preferred in his subordinates. Dark hair, dark eyes, skin tone suggesting ancestors from Earth's equatorial regions, though Zilthax couldn't tell and didn't care. The human carried gear that made no sense, a blade too large to be practical, several containers that smelled aggressively of that bean water they loved, and what appeared to be rope. Actual fibrous rope, like some sort of primitive, hadn't discovered synthetic cordage. "Commander," Chen said, nodding. His Krell was accented, but functional. Craig chittered a greeting that translated roughly to salutations, and also I have already identified 17 potential hazards in our immediate environment. Would you like the list organized by probability or severity? Neither, Zilthax growled. We have a briefing. The briefing room smelled like recycled air and desperation. A Vex administrator, clearly drawing the short straw for this assignment, outlined their exercise with the enthusiasm of someone reading a shopping list. 72-hour wilderness survival course. Navigate 30 kilometers of Torresh-9's temperate forest zone. Reach extraction coordinates. Demonstrate interspecies cooperation. whatever that meant. Standard procedure, nothing remarkable. Dismissed. Zilthax noted Craig had already pulled up topographical maps and was cross-referencing with historical weather data, because of course they were. Chen raised a hand. Weather forecast? The human asked. The administrator's antenna twitched. Partially cloudy. Possible precipitation. Standard parameters. Cool. Cool. What's the wind speed prediction? Barometric pressure trends. The room went quiet. Zilthax felt his secondary eyelids flicker in what might have been embarrassment. The human was asking about weather, as if atmospheric conditions were some sort of tactical consideration rather than a minor inconvenience. Adequate, the administrator said flatly. Chen shrugged and wrote something in an actual paper notebook. Paper. The Krell commander felt a headache forming behind his primary eyes. They deployed at dawn. Craig had 6 backup plans and kept revising them. Zilthax had weapons and confidence, which had served him perfectly well through 3 campaigns. Chen had his weird gear and hummed something that might have been music. The forest was, as advertised, boring. Trees that were probably called trees in whatever language the Torresh native species used before they went extinct from sheer lack of predators. Soil that was adequately soiled. Gravity at a comfortable 1.1 standard. Even Craig seemed disappointed by how little danger presented itself. We will reach the extraction point in 48 hours at this pace, the Vex calculated, mandibles clicking. This leaves us a comfortable margin for unforeseen complications, though I have identified only 3 scenarios that could meaningfully delay us, and 2 of those involve Krell's stubbornness. No offense, Commander. Offense taken, Zilthax muttered, but without heat. The insectoid wasn't wrong. Chen kept looking up. The sky had started doing something, though Zilthax couldn't identify what. The blue was becoming grey, perhaps. Did that matter? On Krell Prime, the sky was orange during the day and black at night, and nobody made a fuss about it. Those clouds are cumulonimbus, Chen said to nobody in particular. Building vertical development. See how the tops are getting that anvil shape. We're going to get weather. It may rain, Kretsch acknowledged. I have accounted for this. Our equipment is rated for moisture exposure. The human did something with his face that might have been a smile, but felt like something else entirely. He started gathering wood. Specific pieces, testing their weight, checking under bark, selecting and discarding. He cleared a patch of ground, arranged stones in a circle, dug a small trench. What are you doing? Zilthax demanded. Prep work. For what? For when things get interesting. The Krell commander decided humans were being deliberately obtuse as a species survival strategy. It was working. He felt too annoyed to eat them. The sky continued its transformation. The grey became darker. The air, which had been still, found movement. Just a breeze at first, then something with opinions. The trees began expressing those opinions back through their leaves. Temperature dropped 5 degrees in as many minutes. Suboptimal, Kretsch announced, checking instruments. Wind speed increasing beyond predicted parameters. Atmospheric pressure dropping. This is unexpected. Is it though? Chen said, now actively building something with the wood he'd collected. A structure of some kind, leaned against a natural rock formation, designed with angles that suggested purpose. The first drops hit like accusations, then like arguments, then like a judicial verdict rendered in liquid form. Within 3 minutes, the sky opened and remembered it was made of water that really needed to be somewhere else, specifically everywhere, all at once, immediately. Zilthax had fought in volcanic regions. He'd survived toxic atmosphere leaks. He'd once endured 3 days in a sandstorm on Krell-7. None of those experiences prepared him for the simple, absolute hostility of water falling from the sky with prejudice. His scales, beautifully evolved for solar radiation absorption and predator intimidation, turned out to be absolutely spectacular at channeling water directly into every gap in his armor. He was drowning, while standing up, while not even near a body of water. His thermal regulation system, designed for a tidally locked planet with predictable hot and cold zones, completely gave up. Alarms he didn't know he had started going off internally. Krell was having what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. Water was shorting out the bioelectric signals between their segmented body parts. They couldn't communicate with themselves. Their exoskeleton, magnificent for radiation shielding, was conducting electricity from the increasingly aggressive lightning. Every thunderclap made them seize up like a malfunctioning computer. The gear they'd been so confident about, sparking, waterlogged, useless. Emergency beacons couldn't punch through the electrical interference. Navigation systems were confused, then dead. Their supplies, rated for moisture exposure in the way that a sponge is rated for moisture exposure, were becoming expensive, soggy lumps. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world became noise and water and occasional violent light. And through it all, somehow, impossibly, Chen was billeting something. Zilthax saw him in lightning flashes, arranging stones, stacking wood, creating structure where no structure should exist. The human moved with purpose, while the universe fell apart. His hands worked while Zilthax's couldn't even grip his weapon properly. Then came the truly impossible part. Fire. Actual, honest, burning fire. In a thunderstorm, while water fell in sheets and wind tried to murder everything horizontal, orange flames that grew and stabilized and shouldn't exist. "Get over here," Chen shouted over the thunder. Survival instinct overrode Krell pride. Zilthax stumbled toward the fire, Krell lurching behind him. They collapsed into the shelter the human had built, a lean-to that somehow redirected wind, created a pocket of almost dry, trapped heat. "That's not possible," Zilthax wheezed, water streaming from his scales. "And yet," Chen said, feeding the fire with wood that burned despite the universe's objections. "How?" Krell managed, their segments slowly reconnecting now that electricity wasn't coursing through them. Chen grinned, and Zilthax realized humans had entirely too many teeth. "First you gather resinous wood, the kind with high natural oil content. See how I stripped the outer bark. The inside stays dry, even in humidity. Second, you build a platform base so your fuel isn't sitting in water. Third, you create a chimney effect with your shelter positioning so smoke rises and pulls air through, but the opening is angled away from wind direction. Fourth, you start with char cloth and fat wood, get your base established, then build up gradually. It's not magic. It's just chemistry and physics and paying attention." "But the rain," Zilthax protested weakly. "Yeah, the rain. We have this on Earth too. Actually, we have worse. This is pretty mild." The two aliens stared at him. "Mild?" Krell's translator barely conveyed the disbelief. Chen started removing gear from his pack. "See, thing about Earth is, it has what we call dynamic weather systems. The planet tilts, so we get seasons. We've got massive oceans that evaporate, then dump water on land. We've got temperature differentials that create wind patterns, jet streams, hurricanes, monsoons, tornadoes that can throw vehicles around like toys, blizzards that bury entire cities. This," he gestured at the storm, "this is what we call camping weather. Little annoying, sure, but manageable. He started laying out their waterlogged equipment by the fire. Zilthax watched in amazement as steam rose from his backup power cell. You can dry electronics. Slowly, carefully. Yeah, you don't want thermal shock, so we rotate them, keep distance, monitor temperature. Learned this stuff as a kid. Summer camp, Boy Scouts, that kind of thing. Although granted, we used slightly more advanced fire-starting methods than flint and steel, but Dad was old-fashioned about teaching fundamentals. Your parents taught you combat survival? Crouch asked. What? No, this is just camping. You know, for fun, family bonding, cooking outdoors, sleeping under stars, that kind of thing. The silence that followed was punctuated by thunder. You do this recreationally, Zilthax said slowly. Well, yeah, it's relaxing, gets you away from screens and schedules, just you and nature. Although I'll admit, most families probably don't camp in storms like this on purpose. Most families have better sense. Chen pulled out ration packs, examined them, made a face. These are ruined. Good news is, there's edible stuff around here. He produced that absurdly large knife. I'll be back. He disappeared into the storm. He's going to die, Zilthax said. Statistically likely. Crouch agreed. 10 minutes later, Chen returned, soaked but unbothered, carrying something that looked vaguely animal. 20 minutes after that, the smell of cooking meat filled the shelter, and both aliens realized they were starving. Their ration packs had dissolved into paste. They'd been too proud to admit hunger. Chen shared without comment, and Zilthax bit into meat that had been properly roasted, seasoned with local herbs that the human had somehow identified as safe versus the poisonous ones. How do you know what's edible? The Krell commander asked around a mouthful of something that tasted better than it had any right to. Pattern recognition mostly. See, on Earth, different regions have different plants, different animals, different dangers. You learn to adapt fast, or you don't survive. Read the environment, test carefully, remember what worked. Humans have been doing this for about 200,000 years, give or take. We got pretty good at it. He poked the fire, sending sparks up into the darkness. Rain still pounded the world outside their bubble of warmth. Your homeworld, Crouched began carefully. What is its hazard classification? Hazard classification? I don't think we have one. It's just Earth. Describe your climate zones. Chen shrugged. We've got tropical regions near the equator, humid, lots of rain and heat. Temperate zones in the middle latitudes, 4 distinct seasons. Polar regions at the caps, frozen most of the year. Deserts scattered around, some hot, some cold. Mountains that create their own weather systems. Oceans that cover 70% of the surface. The weather can change hour by hour depending on where you are. Both aliens had stopped moving. Your planet has multiple simultaneous climate systems. Zilthax asked carefully. Well, yeah, doesn't everyone's? No, Crouch said flatly. Krell Prime is tidally locked. One side hot, one side cold, habitable band in the middle. Temperature variation is minimal. The Vex homeworld is primarily underground colonies. External conditions are largely irrelevant to our development. Chen looked between them. So you're telling me you've never had to deal with actually variable weather? Define variable. Like the difference between a sunny day and a thunderstorm, or winter versus summer, or a cold snap that drops 30 degrees overnight. No. Huh. Chen fed the fire again. That explains so much about your military doctrine. What does that mean? Zilthax demanded, pride stinging. It means you're really good at controlling environments. Your ships, your bases, your equipment. It's all about establishing stable conditions and maintaining them. But stick you somewhere that won't hold still, and you don't have the flexibility. You never needed it before. He leaned back against the rock wall. See, humans couldn't control Earth. Too big, too chaotic. So we learned to adapt instead. Got cold, make fire. Got hot, find shade and water. Food scarce in winter, preserve it, store it, plan ahead. Predators, make better weapons. Disease, develop medicine. Earth kept throwing problems at us, different ones depending on where we lived and what season it was, and we couldn't just solve it once and be done. We had to keep solving it, over and over in new ways. The storm continued its assault. Lightning painted the world in brief, violent illumination. So humans are natural survivors, Krell said slowly, because your environment never gave you an alternative. I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds dramatic. We just called it Tuesday. They sat in silence, listening to the storm, feeling the fire's warmth. Zilthax's scales were finally drying out. Krell's segments had stopped sparking. Both were alive because a human had done things that their extensive military training had deemed unnecessary. Day 2 dawned ugly. The storm, which should have passed according to all models and predictions and prayers, had decided it was having too much fun to stop. Flash flooding turned low areas into rivers. Temperature dropped another 10 degrees as cold fronts collided with warm air. Mud slid down slopes and took the concept of stable footing with it. Chen rebuilt the fire, reinforced the shelter, set up a water collection system using an emergency blanket angled to catch rain and funnel it into containers. He showed them how to layer clothing for insulation, how to recognize hypothermia symptoms, how to navigate using the brief moments when stars appeared between cloud gaps. Every primitive skill became vital. Every piece of knowledge the military deemed obsolete turned essential. You read weather patterns, Zilthax observed, watching Chen study the sky during a brief lull. Yeah, sort of. Pressure changes affect your sinuses and ears if you pay attention. Animals behave differently before major storms. Cloud formations tell you what's building. Wind direction shifts indicate fronts moving through. It's not precise, but it's better than nothing. Why isn't this part of standard military training? Krell asked, genuinely confused. For you guys, because you never needed it. Your military doctrine assumes you can orbital drop into any environment, and your tech will handle adaptation, which works great until your tech gets fried by a thunderstorm or buried in a sandstorm or frozen in a blizzard. Then you're just expensive targets. Chen started smoking strips of meat over the fire, preserving them for later. Humans build redundancy into everything because we can't assume conditions will stay stable. We have backup plans and backup tools and backup skills. Not because we're paranoid, but because Earth taught us that the universe doesn't care about your primary plan. That night, with the storm still raging, 3 soldiers sat around a fire that shouldn't exist, and Chen told stories about Antarctic expeditions where temperatures dropped to -80 and humans kept working. About desert crossings where heat topped 50 degrees and water was worth more than gold. About mountain climbers who summited peaks where oxygen was so scarce you'd hallucinate, then climbed back down because summiting was only halfway done. Each story was more absurd than the last. Each one revealed Earth as something the galaxy would have classified as a death world if they'd bothered to look closer. But humans had grown up there, adapted to it, never realized it was unusual because they had nothing to compare it to. We don't have wilderness survival in our doctrine, Zilthax admitted. We have combat protocols, extraction procedures, tactical formations, but we assume the environment is just a backdrop to war. Big mistake, Chen said. Environment is always the biggest player. Doesn't matter how good your weapons are if you can't see through the sandstorm, or your equipment freezes, or you can't breathe the air. Napoleon learned that in Russia. Hitler learned it in Russia again, because apparently once wasn't enough. Every military in human history learned it the hard way at some point. Logistics and conditions matter more than bravery. Krutch clicked thoughtfully. The Vex prepare for every contingency, yet we never contingencied for the battlefield itself being hostile. Not hostile, Chen corrected. Indifferent, which is worse. Hostility you can fight. Indifference just is, and you have to work around it. Day 3 brought a break in the clouds. The storm exhausted itself, moved on to ruin someone else's day. Extraction teams arrived to find 2 hypothermic aliens, recovering, and 1 human, teaching them to properly break down a campsite using leave no trace principles. The extraction officer, a Vex who'd seen everything twice because collective memory, stopped and stared at the scene. You maintained a fire through the storm. Yes, Chen said. That's theoretically impossible, and yet empirically accomplished. The officer's mandibles worked silently. Report, please. Chen's after-action report was filed, reviewed, and immediately escalated through 6 levels of command before someone with enough authority to panic properly could read it. Within a week, human survival instructors were being requested for every joint training program. Within a month, the Krell were revising their entire environmental operations doctrine. Within 3 months, Death World adaptability training became mandatory for all special operations forces. The irony wasn't lost on Galactic Command, at least not on those smart enough to get the joke. They'd spent centuries measuring species capability by firepower, armor thickness, shield strength, and strategic thinking, all the while assuming that the battlefield itself was just empty space to be fought over. Nobody had considered that the most valuable military skill might be the ability to remain functional when the universe stopped cooperating, to adapt when conditions changed, to make fire when fire should be impossible, and cook dinner while the sky actively tried to electrocute you. Commander Zilthax filed his own report, marked confidential, sent directly to the Krell High Command. Recommend immediate re-evaluation of human species threat assessment. What we interpreted as primitive behavior is actually advanced environmental mastery. They don't conquer their surroundings, they incorporate into them. This makes them far more dangerous than previously calculated. Hive segment Krutch report was longer, more detailed, and included 17 appendices. The summary read: humans possess what we term chaos adaptability, the capacity to function effectively in unstable conditions. This trait supersedes raw physical or technological advantage in variable environments. Recommend further study, and more importantly, recommend never underestimating them again. Back on Earth, Chen Martinez returned to his apartment, filed his own paperwork, and then did what any sensible person would do after mandatory interspecies military training. He went camping. The Appalachian Trail stretched before him, promising absolutely nothing resembling comfort. He set up his tent in light rain, built a fire because he could, and roasted hot dogs on a stick because civilization was great, but sometimes you just needed to cook meat over open flame like your ancestors did. His communicator pinged, official message, promotion to extreme environment specialist, assignment to the new interspecies survival training division, salary increase, commendations, etc. Chen read it while eating a hot dog that tasted like smoke and victory. Extreme environment. As if such a thing existed on some cosmic scale, rather than being entirely relative to whoever was experiencing it. Every environment was extreme when you weren't from there. He was just from somewhere that never let him forget it. Earth didn't give its children an easy path. It gave them problems constantly, in different flavors depending on latitude and season, and somehow humanity looked at this chaos and decided the appropriate response was to invent stick-based meat cooking and call it a hobby. He finished his hot dog, checked the sky. More rain coming probably. He'd sleep well tonight, warm and dry because he knew how to stay that way. Tomorrow he'd wake up, make coffee over the fire, and enjoy the fact that he was absolutely qualified for his new job by virtue of simply being a human who paid attention during childhood camping trips. The universe had hierarchies, power structures, species who thought they'd figured out survival because they'd conquered their specific challenges. But conquest and adaptation were different things. Conquest meant you beat the problem. Adaptation meant you learned to thrive while the problem kept happening. Thunder rolled in the distance. Chen smiled and settled into his sleeping bag. Somewhere out there, aliens were panicking about weather. Here on Earth, it was just another Tuesday. And that, as it turned out, made all the difference.